it looks like things in the bond markets are very close to breaking. You've got inflation is still out of control to some respect, and you've now got a precipitous drop in bonds. Like, bond yields are just going through the roof in an attempt to try and rectify the situation. And I think the bond market's smelling there's a major problem. The equity markets, though, seem to be oblivious to this, and this is where, you know, I'm sitting here looking at this thinking something clearly isn't right. I don't know what's wrong, but, you know, everyone can sort of feel it. It's inflation. It's, you know, this insipid tax that just keeps grinding prices higher, and the bond market's sniffing that out too and trying to adjust its yield to kind of account for that. And this is where I think at this point in time it feels quite ominous, particularly being in October. Typically, you know, major financial crashes happen between September and, you know, first 2 weeks of November. So we're right in the middle of it, and I think a lot of people know that and feel like, you know, we're on the brink of something major happening. And ironically, Bitcoin, though, just keeps ticking along, doing its thing, totally oblivious to all of these market considerations.
Yeah, it's completely irrelevant. One of the things I used to talk about with people about Bitcoin is about how thinking through the rest of the fiat currencies, through the dollar, you see not the dollar going up, but all the other ones going down faster.
Yeah.
And then with Bitcoin, of course, it's the same thing except just one currency up, let's say. And so one thing, and I don't know how much you want to say on camera, but I've really enjoyed your thoughts about thinking, you know, because I've asked you, like, when do you think the Fed pivots? When do you think these things turn? And obviously in the long term, it doesn't matter. But to me, in this transition period, it's really interesting to think about how these different political currencies, these different fiat currencies are like in competition with each other, of like for liquidity, figuring out which can tighten each other's liquidity faster. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, on what the rest of the world looks like, not just the U.S. Because obviously, what you and Peter on what Bitcoin did, that was an interesting discussion with the U.K. and the Australia perspective. So I don't know if you have any thoughts as an international.
Well, I do, and I think, you know, maybe a lot of the commentary I see from, you know, around the macro talks about how imminent the demise of the US dollar is. And I'm like, that may be a little myopic, a little narrow-minded in the fact that if you're able to look around the world and realise just how bad everything else is, all of a sudden this looks really good. And I've got to say, like, it looks really good. And to put an international flavour to this, you know, typically Australian rates, Australia full stop is a much higher risk than the US dollar. Yet our reserve rates in Australia are at 4.1%. America's at 5.1 or 5 over. You know, how does that work? Australia is a, you know, 2% of the global economy. You guys are a 15 times larger economy. The global reserve currency, you know, all we do is basically dig stuff out of the ground, send it overseas to China for processing, and then sending us back. This doesn't compute in my mind. That, you know, you've got typically Australia's interest rates sat between the US and New Zealand. Now the US is at 5, New Zealand's at 5.5. Australia should be somewhere in between. We are not a stronger currency or stronger economy than the US, yet we're acting like it. So what that means is, yes, we've got inflation under control a little better, but I think the US is in a much better spot economic-wise than Australia is, yet we have lower interest rates. Now, that could be for a number of reasons, because I think our economy is far more dependent on housing, so, you know, you can't jack rates up fast enough and, you know, blow the whole place up. But it's funny, you know, in Australia you get 4% on your money. In Australia you get risk-free, and it's the global risk-free, it's not the local risk-free, of 5% or 5% plus. And, you know, I've just seen 30-year treasuries approaching 5%. Like, this is unbelievable. Like, if you're to get 5% on your money, if we were having this conversation 18 months ago, there's no way on earth that would happen. So, I mean, it's just an enormous shift from where we were to where we are now. And, you know, everyone's, you know, thinking pivot, but what if that's not their end goal? What if that's not what they actually want to achieve? And this is, you know, probably a deeper conversation on, you know, maybe that's not what the Fed's trying to do here. You know, and if you think about it, in broader terms, the ECB is trying to introduce central bank digital currencies, and there's factions of the Federal Reserve that are trying that too, but the central bank digital currency, if controlled by the ECB, is an existential threat to the Federal Reserve. So all of a sudden, well, maybe the Federal Reserve and the ECB aren't as friendly as we think they are.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, to me, it makes sense because you have the dollar, then you have the euro, then you have the yen and the yuan. I mean, like, these are essentially competing in a zero-sum game, basically.
Yep.
You know, as Jeff Booth would say, there are different systems of theft, and each one's stealing from each other and their own citizens at different rates. And so, I mean, on one hand, they're kind of working together, but on the other hand, it's just a competition to a certain degree, as far as I can tell. So
Correct, and it's a meta game, and the US is by far the dominant player at it. And for everyone thinking, oh, you know, we're going to have BRICS totally come in and disrupt US dollar hegemony, I just don't see it. I'm like, I get it. I know all of these places, you know, these things are in place, and I could you know, we could be looking back in 10 years' time and, you know, it's a Paul Krugman fax machine type comment, which I've got no doubt it will change, but I just don't think it's going to change anywhere nearly as quickly as people think.
Yeah.
The US dollar is still, you know, God in dollar terms globally. There's no competition to it because there's no liquidity. And if you actually look at the flows and the trade, it's all US dollar. Despite the odd headline contract of, you know, the Saudis accepting Chinese yuan and Russia accepting Indian rupees, like, just think that through for a minute. Like, Russia's accepting Indian rupees, and it's like, I've got these rupees. What's Russia gonna do with it? Like, no one wants rupees. Like, I hate to say it, but and I don't mean to offend anyone. And to be fair, India is a rising power, and I think they've got a huge economic boom in front of them. But is it going to compare to the US dollar? Like, it is a long, long way from competing with US dollar, because, you know, people talk about de-dollarizing the world. Well, because all of the debt, the majority of the debt in the world is US denominated. Guess what? We've got to re-dollarize before we de-dollarize.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, all that debt needs to be reappropriated and back into the, you know, paid out in US dollars. So what does that do? Creates demand for US dollars. So all of a sudden, I'm like, I understand the points intellectually around the adoption of other currencies, and I think it's probably a good thing, you know, to help extract the US from the Triffin dilemma. But the reality and the practicality of it, no one really wants that, because, you know, to the point here, you know, we're in the US. If I turned up with Aussie dollars, they may as well be Venezuelan bolivars here.
Yeah.
Everyone would look at me and go, this paper money? Like, well, firstly, it's plastic and it's, you know, not worth the paper it's written on. Now, the US dollar's worth something because we're here. And if I tried to give someone 20 Aussie dollars for a, you know, $20 US or a $10 US, they'd look at me and throw it away and say, beat it, I don't want your crummy money. And the big game I see playing out is what happens when the world realises that Bitcoin is to the US dollar what the Aussie dollar is to the US dollar.
Thank you so much for watching my content and being a supporter of mine. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun for me to do, and it's really meaningful to know that so many people are enjoying my content and learning about Bitcoin. I think it's so important for people to get off zero. In addition to getting off zero, it is really critical, it is really important that you also begin taking self-custody of your sats and of your Bitcoin. This is because if you have Bitcoin on an exchange or you don't have proper self-custody, this is going to be a massive problem for you in the future, most likely. If Bitcoin starts having rapid periods of appreciation and there are rapid spikes in demand for Bitcoin education, and for Bitcoin advocates and advisors, it's going to be increasingly important that you have self-custody of those coins. So my message to you is please consider getting that self-custody. Now, you can do that on your own. There are plenty of free tutorials online. There's plenty of great work like that. But if you want somebody to help you with self-custody, if you want somebody to help you take cold storage of your Bitcoin, of your Satoshis, if you want somebody to help you set up a multi-sig vault, to set up an estate plan, to set up a plan for you as a person, an individual, as a business owner, as a charity, whatever the case, I work at the Bitcoin Advisor, and I'm happy to say that I really enjoy it. I love working with my clients. You know, my job is literally to help people buy Bitcoin and secure it properly for years, decades, and generations to come. So if you want to learn about my services at the Bitcoin Advisor and what we do, you should click the link in the description. Here you can read a bit about what I do. You can book a free consultation with me. You can book a free meeting with me. I'll send you lots of free complimentary paperwork explaining how multi-sig vaults work, cold storage, giving you all the education you need. Everything's fully open source. What we do, our main goal is education, helping get coins off exchanges, and people be able to not lose sleep at night when they buy and secure their Bitcoin. So you can feel free to book a meeting with me. The first one is free and complimentary, just to figure out what your priorities are and get that adjusted. But if that's something that could be used to you, I really really highly encourage you to take self-custody, whether that's with me or not. Please just do it. But for the many of you that probably will eventually want a multi-sig collaborative custody vault, the Bitcoin Advisor could be the place to go. And so click the link in the description, check that out. Really appreciate your time. And